a product, right? That's good.
Yeah, in Catalonia we got awarded with the first game. Yeah.
Amazing, well done. To my left, we have Oscar from Fundamentally Games, the man with the top hat, almost 30 years of experience, I think, in the industry.
26, 27.
26, 27, close enough. Many successful titles under his belt. Author of the book Games as a Service. Oscar brings a wealth of experience, knowledge, and support to the game dev community in every way possible. And last but not least, we have Emilio at the very end. Hello, Emilio.
Hello.
We know each other quite well. He's from the Godot Foundation. He's been working with them for 2 years, I think, about. Yeah.
Yeah, the Godot Foundation, yes, but many years before in different things.
Perfect. And he's helping developers and studios create amazing games with the use of an open source engine, which is amazing. So again, thanks for joining. It's going to be a pretty informal chat. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different topics, which is really exciting. And I think I'm going to start off with a question to you, Oscar. You've been around for the longest out of all four of us. I'm curious what you've seen in the past 10 years is like one of the most surprising changes or curveballs in the industry, either in terms of a game or a technology or just a trend. So,
yeah. So I mean, I'll probably start with kind of I'll paint a picture. So I made my first game pitch when I was 18. I was told, like many indies are still told to this day, great idea, come back when you've made it. But I think one of the things I think is really interesting, it's particularly the case in the UK. I know it's happened in a number of German regions and other territories as well. There's started to be a lot more interest in providing grants and support, particularly also finding commercial models that can help teams get started. So investment packages, incentives for investors to be able to take the risk on new talent. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to the fact that we're going to have hopefully a great idea. We're going to try and deliver that idea, and we need to be able to do that in a way that works for an audience. When I was trying to do it in 1987, there was no Godot or Unity. I was a former Unity bandit, so I have to mention Unity occasionally, or Epic. There wasn't these tools that you could just go and use. There wasn't these platforms that I could go and make sure that the servers work. I didn't have the ability to go to a store and put my game up regardless of any other ability. Yes, we still have a publishing scheme, but the fact that any indie over the last 10 years has been, in fact longer than 10 years, probably since about 2000 and, I'm going to say 12, but you could argue 2008, we've actually been able to make a game and release it ourselves. And that's powerful. That's amazing. And the fact that it is still a struggle, it's hard to get scale. That's just a factor that we've been so successful at attracting huge numbers of people to want to play our games.
amazing. Yeah, it's a good point. Like I think even with like one of the most famous examples is Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Yeah.
Created in assembly, 1997 or 1998 or something like that.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. And now we have something like Godot, right?
Yeah.
Which is, am I pronouncing it right? Godot or Godot?
As you prefer, like even for the play, which is based on the name, like people in the UK say it one way, in the US another way. But
Yeah, okay, cool.
but yeah, I think to piggyback on the answer, like I also feel like it's more accessible now to have one computer where you can do everything, while before you needed to have a bigger team, and now I think it's more accessible to make games, and that's a big shift.
So to be very academic, there's no more waiting for Godot. Oh wait, sorry.
Always, yeah. We're always waiting.
And I think maybe one of the other challenges, though, at the same time, is there's so much access and ability to create games, and there's so much competition in that same regard. So you found I'd ask, with all these tools, like how would you recommend sticking out to like an investor or a publisher when it comes to creating a game at the moment?
Well, actually, it's like adding up to what they were saying from the point of right now you have so many tools to choose from. So when it comes to pitching to an investor, now it's about how you stand out over the other millions of people that have these very same tools. And sometimes back in the past, as there were less games shipped. I mean, for example, last year it was like 9,000 on Steam or so.
14,000 and I think it's 655 if I remember correctly.
Crazy amount.
Depends on which source you read. Yeah.
So as the more time goes by with the industry, it's harder sometimes to find this new spot, these extra element. And when you're pitching to investors, when you are starting to build up your own game, you need to really focus on one thing and get the technology you know most. And it's fine not to know at the beginning. We need to learn. Everybody needs to learn. But get something you really feel comfortable with and go for it. And from that point, you can start pitching. You'll find out if it's worth or not, why not. And man, there's a lot more on selling than making games at some point.
I'm just gonna, because it'll save Tim from making this, like, make it sound like a sales thing, but this is something I genuinely believe. One of the biggest things that's changed is the absolute understanding of data, even for indie teams. An understanding that actually we don't have to take our opinion about whether a game works or not. We can actually go use platforms. Yes, Antidote's one of them. There are others. But we can use platforms to test this theory we've got. We can spend tiny amounts of money on the ad platforms to test our theories, if it will have a reach. So even indies can now start using some of the techniques that the bigger publishers and teams have been able to do for a decade or more, where we can actually get proof that our idea is the right idea to build. In fact, one of the things I learned from, if any of you are aware, there was a period of time called hyper-casual games where we had these very, very small games. It wasn't about the ads, it wasn't about the money, it was about the production mindset. We could choose to test a dozen ideas of games and find out what players wanted to play. And if anything, that is like the next level, the more recent change that's happened, that's gone beyond just being able to make a game at all, but be able to work out how to make the right game.
Interesting. So what was it like, I guess, maybe 15 years ago, if you had a game and you were developing that game and at some point you maybe realized that this isn't working and we need to pivot? Was that harder to do back then than it is now, or is it more difficult to do that now because there's much more like investment, publishing, there's much more expectation when it comes to games that are coming out?
Yeah, so I mean, there's several theories on that. I mean, the first thing is the AAA style game. The number of AAA studio games that basically were invested in millions and then they just closed the team down. You probably remember the game that you always wanted to come out and then it suddenly disappeared and we went, where did it go? It's because they made the game, they put all the money into the game and then they worked out that it didn't actually have any playability. So we got all excited about something that didn't actually work. Now we do have that ability to get data earlier. We still haven't seen everybody get that right, and one of the downsides of the post-COVID era, where everyone got very excited about the scalability of the industry, which is still positive, don't get us wrong. What we've ended up is having people downsizing recently. So we've seen a lot of bad news in the industry, but let's not get too upset about that because the future is looking brighter as long as we use that data, and yes, it is easier to pivot. But what's interesting about how to pivot is also interesting because we're using engines, because we can swap out art styles. And I'll give you an example of Space Ape. Space Ape had a racing game. I forgot the name of it. It was quite successful in the end. But they went originally with a pixel-based model. And so it looked like pixel art type thing. And it was trash. It just didn't work. And then they changed the art style. All they did was change the art style. Game was massively successful. So pivoting is easier because the frameworks we now have make it easier.
Amazing, thanks for that. Question for you, Emilio. Do you want to add something?
Huh?
There's nothing else? Okay, cool. I'm curious from your perspective, you've got a pretty tough market to be in, right? You're competing with a lot of pretty big engines, and Godot at the moment is doing a lot of good work. How does Godot at the moment focus, and what are you guys looking for in the next 3 years as a focus, 3 to 5 years as a focus to maintaining Godot as successful for indie developers? And what do you think that's going to be moving towards in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, there's been a lot of pressure lately because we were doing our own thing and keeping an engine that was primarily for indie developers, and suddenly like last year there was like this singularity event that suddenly everybody wanted Godot to be what they were using other tools for. So it was a lot of putting like the foot on the ground, saying like, we're going to continue doing this, and we do it for the community, right? Like the users are the ones who are actually telling us what they need, and we are trying to make the tool for them. And it's a bit challenging now because there are bigger studios with different needs, and we've been always working in very small, maybe top like 10 people studios, something like that. But now that there's bigger studios coming, there's different needs, and it's a bit harder to, accommodate that. But we're always, we are a non-profit. Our goal is to make it as accessible as possible, and sometimes those priorities are not too in line with what the business wants us to do. But like the business, the good thing that they have is that they can hire people, they can hire teams, they can make those improvements, and they can share them with everybody. So we don't have to be spending all the money in R&D for developing super high-end features, because the big studios are doing that for us. So we're still focusing on the small indie developer and trying to give the best experience possible.
And what would you say would be, I guess, like a two-part question, the positives and the negatives in terms of challenges, or things that are good about using Godot? What would be kind of like the top three things?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
In terms of like the challenges that indie developers face using something like Godot, would you be able to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenge at the moment is everything that's outside of Godot. So a lot of them, like they were using some maybe audio middleware or some ad network, and when they go and try to use that same service that they were using before, but with the new engine, they find that there's no implementation done, and they need to either do it from scratch or request the company, please, we need this in supporting Godot. And there was also a little bit of, at the beginning, before there were any big games published with Godot, the publishers were not really comfortable signing a game in Godot, because it's like we don't have anyone in our team that knows about it. We don't know how we can support the developers. But then after Raw Fury and some bigger players started signing games and there were successes, everybody's like, you have some of those Godot games over there, right? So it really changed a lot. But the challenges are still outside of our control, because it's the companies offering their services for Godot users.
And I guess on the flip side, what would be a positive of using Godot? Like, what are some of the main benefits from your side of things?
Well, I think the biggest one, and it's why I started getting involved with the project and everything, is that you own everything. It's your code, it's your engine. You can do whatever you want with it. If you want to modify it, you have access to the code, and if you don't know how to modify it, you can hire someone that can actually modify it. So I think.
You mean there's no runtime license needed?
No, there's no runtime license or any sort of fee, and that's what brought me to it. And I feel like the gaming industry has been sleeping for a long time in open source. I also worked a lot in the web development side of things, and everything in web is open source. It's madness to think to use a front end or a back end that's not open source. In the gaming industry, not so much. Everything is proprietary, everything is behind a contract, and that's, I feel the biggest change that we hope to bring, not only for Godot, but for all their engines that are open source as well. It's we have now Balatro using Love2D, which is also open source, and they own all the code and they can do whatever they want with it. So.
Amazing, it's exciting. And I'm going to ask an open-ended question, I guess, around this to all three of you. Is there something in the next, is there a piece of technology you're looking at in the next 3 to 5 years that's really exciting for you guys as studios or as engines? Is there something that just stands out, oh my God, this is going to change the way we make games, or
I would say that one of the major issues we always have is performance. And on that sense, for example, Unreal, we work with Unreal in our company, and this approach they had with Unreal 5 sometimes can be really interesting. So 3-5 years ahead from now, I would love to see more technology letting us to create high-end experiences, but everybody could play it, because sometimes when it comes to the user pool, not everybody has a high-end PC on their homes, and you want to players enjoy your game without the matter of what kind of hardware they have at home. So on that sense, anything that helps, as the technology evolved for us to make it easy to put games out there, I would say anything that makes people be able to play every game.
So I'm a bit biased on this because I'm building some tech at the moment, so I'm going to have my own opinion on it. I mean, the thing that I learned at Unity, why people actually used Unity at the time rather than Epic, was workflow. And one of the things about live ops, I'm a big obsessive about live ops. As Tim said, I wrote a book on games as a service, is about understanding how teams can make continuous updates to their experience, build things that players want to play every third Tuesday and make sure without fail that happens. and how you keep the trains running. So we're building some tech around that, so that's my bias. I think some other stuff around that, so is, I think one thing I find really interesting is we're always seeing people innovating in how we get our games in front of people. So I'm massively interested in how do people connect the dots between the streamer, how they connect the dots between where we are on social platforms, how do we reduce the friction, and I don't know whether we'll see improvements to the way store processes work so we have easier access things, but I'm always interested when we can find not just how we make the games better, but how we get them into players' hands and how players can feel good about sharing their experiences. And we often forget, whether it's a Twitch or a YouTube or whatever else, that's not the important bit. That if we as game developers don't think of our players as having audiences, we're missing a trick. So it's kind of a multi-factor question. Yes, I'm interested in live ops, and obviously I'm building something about that, but I'm also interested in how we build these connections to players that are meaningful. Anyway, that's my bit.
I don't know. If you want to move on, I think they covered a lot, but I don't want to keep building on the thing. But for me, I feel like the ownership of the tools is what I'm more interested about, and now we are kind of seeing, I feel like, a plateau in terms of what graphics card you can get, what processor you have, and you have a lot of successes with very low-end hardware, like the Nintendo Switch. You don't really need the latest and greatest thing to make a great game. And I feel like we've been doing this arm race of going higher and higher and higher and more, but it's not actually adding a lot of value to the games. So I feel like the technology is very, very good already. So we have to use it in a different way, I feel.
And I'm going to ask you a kind of a difficult question here, mate, Sperrin. Last year, I think it was last year, maybe it was earlier this year, there's been a few pretty kind of odd releases that have come out, at least in my opinion, that have changed how people look and view games and how you can release them. For instance, Palworld, right? Palworld came out and it had millions of players, built by a studio of 11 people, I think it was, something like that. Do you think that studios should look at someone like Palworld and think that we can replicate something like that by going extremely off the deep end and just take a big risk? Or do you think that you should still kind of try and follow the status quo of how things work, try and copy games? What do you think?
Good question. No, I think there's a duality right there when it comes to innovation too. As I was saying before, this point of what is the thing that you're coming up with and what is this extra. And also there's the market tendencies in the sense that this year, for example, Palworld came in, this happened, plus 1 month, and it's a completely different story. And they made their business. They pay upfront, that's fine, and there you go. So I think that it depends on what you want to do, and again, what are your expertise as a team and what you want to be doing. In the sense of if you want to be trying to create something kind of innovative, different, but not too weird that doesn't have a market. So in the end, we need a market to look at. And that's why metrics, KPIs, and all these come in, because there must be someone who's playing. It's not about, I want to do this art piece and somebody will play it. It's more about, where the market is, what they want at some point, and trying to figure out what will they want in the future months or years or whatever development that you have within certain boundaries of the niche that you are. So in the sense of Palworld, for example, it was creatures, they're always worth it. I don't know. There's many games around creatures that work just because they have creatures, since we have Pokemon. So there's some bettings you can be doing there. But in the end, publishers as well, there's some risk there. So sometimes this question could go, maybe I transfer to you, in terms of publishers and if they want to take this risk or not, and how they handle these situations.
I'll come to that. I just want to say a couple of things. So first thing is, the indie community is where innovation comes from, because it's only the indie community that can take the risks. The big publishers cannot realistically take risks like that. But remember a couple of things. First thing is, most of the stories like this, which we aspire to, are survivor stories. And for every one of those, there are hundreds, if not thousands, and I am not exaggerating, that hit the dirt and crashed and burned. So the real story is, what is your appetite for risk? And you've got to be honest about that. And then you decide what you're going to make out of that, plus what you can test. Again, I'm going to come back to testing everything. Let's make a hypothesis. Let's work out what we think the KPI should be, and let's try it. And try small things. There's a book called The Lean Startup, which has been out for a long, long, long time. It's, I still think, really, really useful. It's not the only way to work, but it's a really useful way to think. Build something small to prove the idea, and then we can build the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be successful by throwing the kitchen sink at everything and just making it happen and going through it, like some kind of Conan the Barbarian in a wild world. If you can pull that off, if you've got the chutzpah or whatever it is to do that, brilliant. But Mythbusters said it in 2 quotes. Failure is always an option. The second quote is, the only difference between screwing around and science is writing things down. So when you go for that big bet, when you want to take the big challenge, you might get the roulette wheel number come up on you. Fantastic. Most of you won't. But if you write it down, if you build on the experience, and you apply that knowledge to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, you may just get that wonder hit and look like the amazing success story that happened overnight when really it took 20 years.
Yeah, it's great. And also, like, I feel the motivation, it's very important. If you're only chasing the latest trends, you're not going to get the motivation to actually go through the entire project. And yeah, exactly. That's why being indie is so important, right? You can come up with an idea, you can present it very quickly, and you want to like it. If you're trying to imitate the latest trend, it might work. Like, I'm not saying it won't, but we had games like Vampire Survivors, which were not particularly new, but it was at the right time. And then there's a lot of imitators that maybe they are only chasing that, right? That's also when you're raising money. Now it's also like, if everybody's doing battle royales, you need to add that to your pitch, right? Our game now will be a battle royale because we're gonna get the funding. And what I like about the bootstrapped indies is that they will do what they want to do, and usually that leads to more motivation from the devs and originality.
By the way, your pixel-based platformer is not unique.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this sort of like smaller scale indie games we're seeing a lot lately is the future of the indie industry, and not so much that sort of feel that we live through a struggle of trying to be validated, like we are also part of the industry, and we're chasing the AAA too much. When then, there's very small teams pushing out amazing games, like I mentioned before, Balatro or like Animal Well, or a lot of them that are just very small team, or even one person, like Stardew Valley and all that, and it's the motivation from them to make that game, not trying to make the next Pal World, the next Battle Royale, or the next indie shooter, arena, whatever, right? Like,
amazing. I like that you mentioned Balatro.
I just want to chuck something in there.
Addictive.
So I was at the Courage event, which is an industry where you get to see lots of like small indie games, and lots of games out there. The one that caught my eye was a game that will never make millions. It was just a game about waiting. It was literally waiting to go to the toilet, waiting to download a piece of software, and you did lots of very, very dull things, and it was beautiful, and I loved it, and I'm so glad it exists. But the point of it is that the team that make that are crafting, they're learning their craft, they're producing something which will be memorable, and that may possibly build them a community, and community is what makes this stuff works.
And I just wanted to add to the point that he was making on the sense of the prototyping, and when you are starting as indie, we are way more agile when testing and trying. So prototyping is a massive thing, and when you're prototyping, test as well. So get the feeling of that, not just your feeling. You can fall in love with your product, get the feeling from others, and prototyping helps a lot, and that comes with, for example, Godot and other engines. So maybe you want to build on Unity or Unreal, but you don't really know too much yet of that engine. There's so many things that need to be built in before you really prototype something. We, for example, have internal plugins that save us like 6 months of basic work that needs to be done in order for engine to work, because Unreal is like a setup. So on that sense, Godot, I think it's one of these ones that can let you get started with prototyping way faster. And it doesn't matter if later on you develop in another engine, get something that I've seen prototypings in Paint. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the heck you have.
I still like paper prototyping. I do a lot of like whiteboarding, and I'll do like 50 different ideas and then destroy 90 of them. And then I've got like maybe 1-2 ideas I'll then put into a trailer, and then I'll test that. I won't even make the game yet.
So I've got a curiosity from my side of things. I know playability and entertainment and being cool and unique and interesting is super important for an indie, but money is also extremely important too. And like previously, maybe 15 years ago, the idea of having money-based games, even pay-to-win skins, was, unheard of, right? Counter-Strike had these skins and it was a massive market. Now it's everything all the time, always has something related to money in it. I'm curious I might go with you, Oscar, because I think we've spoken about this before offline. How would you get ethical practices around monetization into your game? Because it's a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, so first thing I'm going to say is there is no such thing as play to win. It's called a broken game. It's not a game anymore. And the reason I go into this is because I had a job a long time ago where I had to build a gambling platform, and I'm really glad I went through the process. I will never touch it again because it's just not in my DNA. I'm not being critical for people who want to do that, but that's a different business. It's a different experience. It's a different form of entertainment. And obviously it has its safeguard issues, and it's got your customer issues. And we have, as an industry, a responsibility to look after vulnerable people. I'm not a fan of some of the things that are going on that side. If anyone wants to debate on this, please come and find me later. I'm very happy to do it. But ethical monetization is about going back to a very, very basic principle. What do players actually like? What do you care about? In fact, if there's a fundamental principle in any marketing of anything ever in the world, which is the job that we have to do in any business, is to identify and satisfy customer needs. And if we're building a spreadsheet to squeeze extra pennies out of people rather than how do we identify the next thing they want, what we're losing is long-term revenue, long-term engagement, long-term trust. And the reason why I go on about ethical monetization all the time, and I do design courses and teach people how to do this stuff, is because I believe that I want a long-term relationship with my player. I want the players to leave the game, even if it's a one-off adventure, to go and buy the next one, to look forward to the excitement of the next experience. And they're not going to do that if they felt shortchanged, manipulated, squeezed. I want them to go and see the Hat of Wonder as an IAP item that they can get and go, I want the Hat of Wonder, it's amazing, and then wander around and show off the Hat of Wonder to people. That is when people feel satisfied. There's a whole bunch. If anyone wants to have a proper conversation about it at some point, I'll tell you all about the consumer behavior as risk-taking, all the psychological elements of that. There's real ways of doing this that don't have to be dark patterns. There are patterns out there. We can choose to do it for the players' benefit, or we can use it for ill effect. And please, just don't do dark patterns.
Yeah, regarding monetization on that, it's very tricky because when you're in a country that's a little bit less resourceful, you find that people are more focused on creating the next Flappy Birds or creating the next Match 3 because that's what they need, right? Like the necessity of we need to make money to survive. It's how can we get there as fast as possible? Then you go to other countries that people have more resources and they're making those really artsy games that we all love, and I really enjoy it a lot. But it comes from a little bit of privilege, the fact that they can dedicate their time to try an idea that might be just an exploration of feeling, right? Not just how to monetize it. So unfortunately, at the moment, there is not a lot of money flowing. So we're gonna start to see a lot more. Yeah, it is getting better, but it's still not what it used to be, and I feel like that's always a little bit of a compromise that you need to find in terms of like, okay, I need to make money with this, but try not to lose what your idea was. But yeah.
One of the issues at the moment is that there's a reaction by the ad companies for the mobile. Ads is particularly mobile, but there's a particular reaction where they've lost revenue, so they've tried to double down. And the way they've doubled down is they've extended the period of time you have to stay on the ad. And actually that's counterproductive. It works for the ad company, but it actually damages our retention. So we're in an odd situation. Anyway, I thought I'd check that out.
And from standpoint of indie development, because there's one hard truth sometimes to chew, which is you're a business. You can live out of thin air. So at some point you have your creation, you have the game you wanted to make, and people is loving that game. That's fine, that's perfectly fine. Yet you have to monetize it at some way. So here also comes you as a developer, as a company, you have to decide what kind of monetization you feel comfortable with. There are several ways, and each of them has its speeds and its flows and all these kind of things. So also, if you are willing to search for a publisher, or you're willing to search for a partner that help you on this marketing journey, which is incredibly hard, what am I gonna say? And basically, it's important that you feel comfortable with this partner, because sometimes, as he was saying, is this point at some, the game starts getting traction, starts working, then man, when money is in the middle, some people lose their head and your brain and start saying, well, why don't we? And they break down your game, and they just destroy. And I mean, Overwatch 2, that's all.
I go back to Battlefront 2 because that's the granddaddy of screw-ups.
Yeah, and when it comes to monetization and free-to-play, that horse did a lot.
And I think it's fine, right? If the game itself is good and there's monetization elements in it, say something like Survivor.io, hyper casual game. I play it sometimes. It's got monetization in it. I've probably paid $5 for a skin or something like that, and it's fine. Like, it's okay because the base game is good. It's fun to play. I enjoy playing the game, so I think that's useful.
But again, that's the point from the game. I mean, if you look at the standpoint of the free-to-play, that maybe it's the one that has been more targetized for this kind of the ethical and non-ethical ways of doing pay-to-win, pay-to-go faster, and all these kind of things. If you look at the monetization of a game, it's well done. Like League of Legends, it's everything skins, and they got plenty of money, and there's no progression related there, aside from certain skins that are banned for leagues and stuff. But the way they built all their monetization model, it's within the ethical standpoint of the game should keep being the same for everybody. And there's this point of there's many ways of making. If we, for example, start using these free, extra free monetization systems inside the game, it will be always from this standpoint of the aesthetics and these elements that are giving you these extra content or this extra feeling into the game, but not changing the ability or the capacity you have within the game. Because if you're paying for this extra, that's fine. You are getting this extra element.
So I'll challenge that a little bit. So there's a lot of assumption that cosmetic is the only thing you want to sell. But there's a point where players will go, but why would I want that? Unless you've got an audience that are absolutely committed to showing off, and you've got the systems in place to show off, that isn't going to work at all. But also, that's always like the introductory level of how monetization in games has worked. And I'm talking since like 2003, games like MapleStory and stuff like that is where this kind of stuff happened. In fact, that's where I got a lot of the inspiration when we worked on things like PlayStation Home, looking at the way those systems were operating. But I think the interesting thing is that we get frightened of offering extra value through playability. But the reality is, even as back as far as, I've forgotten which game it was, but there was a classic online Battlefield style game where they introduced pay for weapons. and the audience before it was released were absolutely damning. They hated it. It was terrible. And the most vocal community members screamed, "This is never going to happen." And it came out, and the very people who screamed spent the most money. So sometimes you have to be a bit careful about what you listen to. Never don't listen to players. Always listen to players. But sometimes it's hard for a player to imagine what you're talking about. And it's very easy to get caught up in the hype of this must be bad. But actually, look at the ways that people get access to things that they value. For example, power-up crystals. You know, I've had a wonder. It gives me a ability to influence people by nudging 10% better chance of a persuasion check. But if I have a crystal attached to it, I get an extra 10%. Those sorts of things can be done very smartly and very easily, especially if we don't just get access to them by paying. So thinking about your economy, thinking about your player experience, thinking about the whole thing as a whole holistic piece can make a better experience for the player where no one feels bad about having a benefit. Instead, it's just part of how we apply it. So it's about thinking smarter and be more nuanced, but at the end of the day, making sure that you do not break the game economy, you do not break the trust with the player. That's the thing that matters, not whether it's cosmetic or functional. Does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the safest bet, doing a premium game, you sell it, they buy it, that's it. You don't have to make a business plan for that. You don't need to do like the numbers with the power-ups. Like
Not true. Not true. As soon as you go premium, you got. I've got a whole lecture series on how to basically think about what pricing means and pay premium games, particularly because pricing of your premium game is set based on the expectation you're setting. There's also a whole bunch of things by a guy called Coppola talking about pricing strategy, where the real word premium comes from, which is actually means something very specific, which is high value, high quality. And it's a very different pricing strategy from economy, which means low price. So there's really, and commodities, there's a whole bunch of strategy and there's a whole bunch of tactics. And then that comes into how you then manage price. With a premium game, you've actually got to have a massive strategy of how you're going to engage with sales, particularly on Steam. If you don't understand how you're going to engage and deal with the depreciation of the impact of your sale discounts, that's a massively important pricing marketing process. It's not as simple as saying premium is easy and pay and in-game is hard.
Yeah, but it's only one variable that you need to control instead of the monetization alternatives. That's why if you are one person in a single team of like an indie, it's probably the more affordable or like the more easy to comprehend rather than trying to create a plan with different methods and venues.
Callum Underwood has got a nice piece, an article talking about why it's more complicated.
One last thing, I think we are coming close to doing some Q&A, but I've got one more thing. This is a personal thing I'm quite curious about. It's kind of related to marketing, I guess, to some degree. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, YouTube was kind of becoming a bigger thing, and there were people like, I guess, PewDiePie was kind of promoting a lot of games, but now it's like ridiculous. There's so many different YouTubers and Twitch streamers playing all different types of games. You mentioned Animal Well, right? Like Donkey is a huge advocate for video game. Donkey's a huge advocate for indie games. How do you guys see this continuing in the next 5 years? Do you think it's going to continue upwards, downwards? Do you think it's going to stay the same? Do you think that a lot of questions here, I know, but like, do you think the indie companies should try and leverage these content creators as well to promote their games and push them?
Let me do an intro on that, on the sense of the marketing aspects have evolved as the technology evolves. Back in the day, you have papers and all that stuff, and now you have phones, and now you have Instagram, and so it will evolve. I don't know really where it go. Where will it go? But right now, that's the way it works, and you see a lot the people from the marketing side that adapt to the new approach, and the ones that try to stick to the old ones, and then they say, oh, why a PR marketing strategy didn't work that well? So I think it's something more than saying where it will go, because we're developers. Maybe he can answer that more. But yes, to the point of you need to be flexible to the current situation and the current way that the world and the market works when it comes to the marketing, because it's always constantly changing.
I'll go last.
Yeah, I think it really is important, but at the same time, it shouldn't be like your only option, right? Like if you are all waiting to, I'm gonna sell my key to the streamer, so he will play it on the stream, and everybody will buy the game. That's usually not how it happens. But it's really important to know where your audience might be. And I see a lot of indie developers marketing to other indie developers, and it's maybe like not the best place to be. But it's always, you know, you have to find for your game and where your audience is, how can you get them to see it at least a couple of times until they decide, like, maybe I will want to give it a go.
Yeah. So having spent a couple of years working as a publisher, it's really interesting dealing with this at the, you know, the coal face, if you like. So one of the things I'd say is streaming has become central, particularly for Steam and other PC platforms. And I'd argue also particularly for console-based marketing. It's absolutely critical path for that piece. But it's also interesting having, because I also do mobile, and I've got a lot of history in mobile as well, just how important paid UA was in the old days. And what's happening now is the mobile games need to learn about what we get from using, you know, streamers and PR and community on PC and Steam. And Steam type and PC marketing has to learn from direct user acquisition that we learn through the processes on mobile. And when we take those lessons and we actually learn from them, then we can start looking at this as a more integrated marketing experience. But there's some fundamental things that I think is really fascinating about the space, particularly, you know, I can bore you for 10 hours on how to market your game. I will charge you for it as well. Anyway, but the point being that we're in this space where it's not good enough, as you were saying, to just do streamers. Absolutely true. But you've got to put the same amount of effort as if you were just doing streamers, because it's that much effort. There are platforms out there now which are starting to make that easier. A couple that I've worked with, things like DropeMe and things like Daredrop, where they're connecting you to micro influencers, you're setting challenges for those micro influencers, and then you're basically able to spend relatively small amounts of money, well, indie level amounts of money. Sometimes they're more expensive, sometimes they're not. So you can start accessing a community of streamers who will proactively create stuff for you. That's fantastic. But again, you got to work out what can you actually afford, what can you actually do, what amount of work can you personally do to reach out. And I forgot all the platforms you can use to check different streamers' ratings, but paying attention to the numbers, reaching out to people, and having an authentic attitude. Because your job as an indie isn't just to try to get them to sell your game. Your job as an indie is to make them excited about your game and to help them make amazing content. The mic drop thing, the reason why I want to go last is that I have a prediction for you, which is that mobile, I believe mobile streaming is going to hit a point where it becomes more dominant than PC. We're not there yet. I'm not too sure why, because you can now natively stream on Twitch, OBS, various other things already on your mobile device. It's already the device that you consume most of your content. And yet we haven't seen the tip over happen yet. The closest we've got is TikTok. But there is a snag, which is we can't as easily create the content because we're holding the device at the same time. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but I believe that the mobile still is the most portable device. And when I'm promoting Steam games, guess which platform people are looking at? They're looking at their mobile devices. And that, I think, is fascinating.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Any questions? We can do a Q&A session now. We can hand the microphone around if anyone wants to ask any questions. Speak now or forever hold your truth. Going once, going twice, 3 times. Good. Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you jumping on this panel with me and having a chat. Hopefully we'll see you guys around the Gamescom. We are also doing some drinks at the Games from Spain booth down there. If you guys want to come and have a wine or a beer or a vodka or water or whatever you want. Pick your poison. Cool. Thanks, guys.